Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for international cooperation and integration. He was speaking on Monday to an online gathering of the World Economic Forum's Davos Agenda. Feng Yilei has our top story.
President Xi Jinping champions economic globalization to the international community at the World Economic Forum that looks to address critical challenges facing the world today. He referred to changes in pandemic unseen in a century, but said globalization is unstoppable.
Economic globalization is the trend of the times. Though counter currents are sure to exist in a river, no one can stop it from flowing to the sea. Countries around the world should uphold true multilateralism. We should remove barriers, not erect walls. We should open up, not close off. We should seek integration, not decoupling. This is the way to build an open world economy.
Xi Jinping spoke of China's solution to major pressing issues, how to beat the pandemic and how to rebuild a post-COVID world. He said countries of the world should learn from comparing long history cycles and foster new opportunities on the basis of mutual respect and finding win-win common ground.
Facts have shown once again that amidst the raging torrents of a global crisis, countries are not riding separately in some 190 small boats, but are rather all in a giant ship, carrying our shared destiny.
It is the third time for Xi to stress the importance of upholding openness and solidarity at the forum. Last year, the Chinese president championed multilateralism amid a global crisis. And in 2017, he strongly advocated for economic globalization and warned against protectionism. The Chinese president expressed confidence in China's economy. The latest economic data show that China's growth far exceeded the government's targets last year. Despite economic pressure on the horizon, Xi Jinping says China will not grow at the cost of environment or its people's well-being.
As a rising tide lifts all boats, everyone will get a fair share from development, and development gains will benefit all our people in a more substantial and equitable way.
The Chinese leader also called on the world to do everything necessary to emerge from the shadow of the pandemic and boost economic and social recovery and development.
Klaus Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, has outlined what he sees as global priorities.
At this pivotal moment, I see several priorities for the global agenda. We must continue to fight against the global pandemic. We must revitalize the global economy and accelerate its transition to net zero. We must preserve biodiversity by deploying nature-based solutions, and we must narrow the gap between the rich and the poor to achieve more sustainable global development.
Now let's talk about this some more with economist Wang Yaojing, who's in Beijing, and she's an associate professor at Peking University. Professor Wang, thanks so much for joining us on Global Watch. I'd like to ask you first about some of the points that President Xi made in his address, and he's saying that standing together is the only way out of this pandemic. We're 2 years into this, and of course vaccines is key to this. So when it comes to vaccine production, distribution, how can countries work together on this?
Yes, thank you for having me. So the WHO has called for vaccine equity, and most of us would agree that no one is protected unless everyone is protected. So China has helped more than 120 countries with more than, I think, 2 billion doses of COVID vaccines, which is really the top of the world, and China will be supporting Africa with another, I think, 1 billion doses this year. However, there are still several obstacles regarding the vaccine production and distribution. So there are barriers in patents and production that prevents most developing countries from producing the vaccines themselves. That means the countries or companies that possess the technology and production capacity would have the leverage in distributing the vaccines. That's why we see countries like Israel can have the 4th doses, and while some of other countries don't have even the 1st. And secondly, the non-pharmaceutical interventions, the NPIs, are equally important in combating the pandemic, especially when the variants like Omicron had can get past the immunity built by the vaccine. So whether it's vaccine or non-pharmaceutical interventions, we need to stand together and work together to have everyone protected so that we can combat this disease.
She also said that countries should start looking for some new growth drivers as they try to normalize and roll back virus controls. But what are some of the options?
Well, there are several options to this. First one is a technology-intensive ways, which are, say, pharmaceutical industry or like the digital economy. So these are very technology intensive. This will pose a challenge for most developing countries that lack the research abilities. And the other one option is the infrastructure, which is a viable option if the government has strong fiscal standing or is able to borrow debt or attract foreign investment. But in order to attract foreign investment, a country would need to be able to contain the pandemic and maintain a stable business environment, which is also a great challenge to most of the developing countries. So it is probably their best strategy to cooperate with other countries and work together to face those challenges.
And of course, one of the big challenges is uneven global recovery. So Oxfam is saying that there's unprecedented inequality, and it says that the world's 10 richest men more than doubled their collective fortune during the pandemic, whilst more people are actually living in poverty. So why do you think that has happened, and how do you reduce this gap?
So we do observe the pandemic and subsequent financial policies have increased the wealth gap among people as well as countries. So for pandemic reasons, if people were to look out for themselves in the pandemic, whoever had more resources are going to be better off. And people with limited resources would have a greater risk of getting the virus, and that makes the situation worse. And the subsequent financial policies, if they are economic first, and that would even worsen the situation by driving up the asset prices, which is even more concentrated in rich people's hands. And also inflation, by the same logic, would affect rich people much less than those who live on a budget. So and then also major countries, if they have excessive quantitative easing policies, that would transfer those financial risks to other countries, which will further enlarge the inequality even between the countries. So if the politicians, they make these policies choices they are basically exchanging long-term social benefits for short-term political benefits. So only when the government think for the long term and for the general public and even for the people in the whole world, would it be possible to avoid such diverging wealth equality.
Professor Wang, thank you. And we do have more questions for you, so please do stay around. We'll be back to you very soon.